K-pop is an industry that is surrounded by and dependent on both fans and the media in general. Of course it is, it's a media-based industry. But K-pop takes everything, I would argue, several degrees further than other related industries, like the American pop industry. But although K-pop has all variety of big and small scandals, some of the most interesting ones are the ones that were neither. The ones that started up and then just fell flat on their faces. The ones that no one really remembers except veterans of the community because they just weren't important enough to remember. The ones that are so wacky and so out there that even if they had all the evidence in the world supporting them, they wouldn't get off the ground because they are literally just that stupid. They're the funny and ridiculous K-pop scandals. Now, when I say ridiculous, I don't mean ones that the community deems as ridiculous. Things like dating scandals, which many people think shouldn't actually be considered scandals, since, well, it's normal to date. These scandals are called ridiculous because outside of the K-pop industry, we would barely bat an eye at them. No, the ridiculous ones I mean are the ones that are so far out of reality that they, well, like I said earlier, fall flat on their faces, and often create memes within their fandoms for years to come, at least within the members of the fandoms who were there when it happened. Because these scandals, surprisingly, seem to be forgotten very quickly. Weird, since they're so outrageous. Anyway, let's take a magical journey today through the world of funny K-pop scandals, from 15-year-olds being gangsters to copycat groups and the first misandry scandal in K-pop. Yes, you heard me right. K-pop scandals have been around almost as long as K-pop itself. An industry as straight-laced as this in a conservative country like Korea is bound to have anything and everything go wrong, and anything and everything be considered a scandal. It doesn't help that K-pop encourages very strong parasocial relationships, and thus, fans will feel incredibly invested in the lives of their idols. Additionally, many K-pop fans are young, anxious people, who thus have more time to spend online, and since many of them may be bullied, socially withdrawn, or otherwise, there is more stake put into these relationships than would be by well-adjusted, fully employed adults. None of these things I've mentioned are things to shame people about. They're just general demographic factors, and in fact, the far greater burden of responsibility should be on the society that makes young teen girls feel socially anxious, ugly, and weird for their passions. But that's a topic for another day. The fact of the matter is that many factors, the fan base, the nature of the industry itself, how so many things these days are online, and the straight-laced nature of K-pop in Korea, all combine to create an industry where the tiniest of things can become a career-ruining scandal. So let's start at the start and give a quick rundown of some of the biggest or most important scandals of the K-pop world. That said, it's quite hard to make a timeline of the history of K-pop scandals, since no real timeline exists on the internet and it's hard to even find any mention of the first scandal in K-pop. The only thing that comes up when Googling the first scandal in K-pop is the massive Burning Sun scandal and Sully's death, which isn't even a scandal, so I don't know what's going on there. So this will be a very incomplete list based on scandals that I can find online. Let's have a look. A lot of earlier scandals have been compiled by Ploopy, who makes great informative videos on them. She has actually covered most of the early scandals and conflicts that I know of. The first one I can find was the massive fan war between fans of Skeksis and HOT, which involved actual bloodbaths. The two groups were very popular in the 1990s, and during this period, their fan bases were in a very intense battle with each other to prove which group was the best. This resulted in several physical altercations, including several where fans were sent to the hospital or arrested for assault. The next group are all from the early 2000s. The first is the scandal where artist Bak Ji-yeon had a tape of her having sex with a manager released in 2000. The tape had been filmed and released against her will, and although she was an adult at the time, the manager who had been using the tape to blackmail her was later arrested for having sex with a minor. So, he doesn't seem like a very nice guy for multiple reasons, to say the least. Next, we have the first bullying scandal, which belonged to the group Sharp, and emerged in 2002. One of the group's members, Ji-young, was mercilessly bullying another member, Ji-hae, who had been added to the group and taken Ji-young's spot as centre with her massive talent. Ji-young also bribed and manipulated other members of the group and members of the staff to also bully Ji-hae and to speak out publicly against her. This included getting managers and even her own family involved. When the scandal became public, Ji-young led the public to believe she was the one being bullied. However, the scandal has a relatively happy ending, where a manager Ji-young bribed broke with her and revealed the truth, that she was actually the merciless bully. The group later disbanded and Ji-hae became a successful soloist, so successful in fact that she was hospitalised from exerting herself too much from so many schedules. Other scandals from the early 2000s include when Baby Vox's member Guy had lied about her age, saying she was in her 20s when she was in fact in her 30s, a decade older than all of the other members of the group. This had been noticed as she was visibly older than the other members, was a far worse dancer, often wore glasses and other items to hide her face and wrinkles, and sometimes made mistakes in her honorifics, such as calling someone who was supposed to be younger than her oppa, a term reserved for men older than the woman. In the end, she left the group for obvious reasons. There was also, I don't know if this counts as a scandal, but when Super Junior debuted, they debuted with a Chinese member, Hanggung, who, because he was Chinese, was only allowed on very few Korean broadcast stations and had to hide his face with a mask. This clearly angered the members, since in one performance, the video of which has unfortunately been lost to time, fellow member Heechul ripped his mask off on stage and encouraged him to perform at the front of the stage. This was a very bold declaration from Heechul, which seems to have caused Hanggung some stress at the time, but I get the impression from his interviews that he was grateful nonetheless. I don't know if he was eventually punished for this reveal of his Chinese face on TV, but nonetheless it has gone down in history as a piece of lost K-pop media. Another scandal in the early 2000s was the 2002 banishment of singer Steve Yu from the country. Although Steve wasn't a part of K-pop as such, he was still a popular singer in Korea in the 1990s and early 2000s. However, in 2002, when he was due to fulfill his mandatory military service, he became a citizen of America and moved there, supposedly in an attempt to dodge his service. The Korean government and general public looked incredibly unfavourably on this, and Yu was banished and banned from ever entering the country again. Although he has apologised countless times and has appealed his banishment, he has still not been allowed into the country again, other than a 3-day period to attend the funeral of his fiancée's father. He has attempted to restart a career in mainland China and Korea, but it doesn't seem to have taken him far. It seems that the South Korean public still generally dislike him, an indication of how crucial military service is to the nation. During this time being the late 2000s and early 2010s, we had a few scandals, including some funny dating ones, some more bullying ones, and the regular things you'd expect from an industry like this, like having groups with too sexy of a concept for their age, doing drugs, abuse of minors, sexual assault, and getting extensive plastic surgery. Yep, those things are definitely on a spectrum from meh to horrid. The next big scandals I can think of come up in the late 2010s and early 2020s. We have the aforementioned deaths of Sully, Hara, and Jonghyun, most notably in the late 2010s, which I wouldn't consider scandals, but which definitely shook the industry. Then we have the scandal of AOA Jimin bullying fellow member Mina in 2019 and 2020. Jimin was eventually proven innocent, and it has since become clear that Mina is demanding and manipulative and slacked off in her work as an idol. There was also the Burning Sun scandal, possibly the largest scandal in the history of K-pop, where Seungri, the maknae of massively successful boy group Big Bang, was involved in a scandal involving a nightclub, including the assault and trafficking of women, filming of pornographic videos without their consent, and the usual drug/gambling charges you would expect to accompany something like this. Seungri's involvement in the case ended in 2022, where he was given a sentence of 1 year in prison and a fine, which many felt was way too light of a punishment. Scandals these days are mostly what you would call more chill. The majority are dating scandals with one major exception. That exception being the massive chunk of childhood bullying scandals levelled against idols starting from late 2020 to around mid-2022. Many idols from popular and unpopular groups alike were accused, either of bullying people in school, in the workplace, in their groups, or past partners. The majority of these accusations were proven false, or at least to be hugely exaggerated. Some idols accused include Mingyu of 17, Garam of LE SSERAFIM, Lucas of NCT and WayV, Soojin of Idol, Fatu of Black Swan, and others. Some left their groups and some didn't. Let's just say that 2022 was a year of many people leaving their groups, often due to these kinds of accusations. In the end, I think that most people disregarded most of them, since there was clearly a very obvious pattern, and thus almost none of them had any evidence behind them. In late 2022 and early 2023, we also had two interesting scandals. I say interesting in that the public seemed pretty united on them, which is unusual, and that both were related to groups with lots of members. Rookie group Omega X, who were relatively unknown in the industry, came to attention in late 2022 as videos of them being physically and verbally abused by their CEO on tour emerged. The footage included her verbally abusing the members for their health issues during a poorly managed and packed world tour. Other allegations against the CEO made by fans and members alike included sexual abuse, blackmail and verbal abuse, leaving the group stranded in America while the staff flew back to Korea, and general financial mistreatment. In the end, the group all filed to end their contracts and were all successful. They created a new Instagram account run purely by the members, which detailed their trials, thanked their fans, and was a continual act of rebellion against a company which didn't allow them to run their own social media. I'm not entirely sure what Omega X are up to these days, but they're all free of their company and presumably happier, and that's what matters. After writing this script, I found out that they've released a few more albums. I don't like their new sound as much, but I'm glad that they can still perform and have comebacks on music shows, which is clearly what they wanted to do as a group. The other large group was also far more well known. LOONA. LOONA were known for their unique concept and debut, where each member debuted as a soloist, then in subunits, then as a whole group. They had the most expensive debut in K-pop and had an expansive and interesting story. In December 2022, Blockberry Creative, the company behind LOONA, put out a statement saying that member Chu had been rude and abusive behind the scenes, and thus would be expelled from the group. This may shock you, and it shocked the K-pop community and industry even more, because everyone and their mother knew that Chu was way too nice to do this. No one, and I mean no one, not even people like me who knew nothing about LOONA and Chu, believed it. Within hours, staff members and others who had worked with her came out and said that this statement was complete BS and that Chu was a lovely person. Fans were outraged. It later became clear that Chu had argued for a better contract with the company, using her status as one of the most popular members of the group and thus a big moneymaker, to get a slightly, and I mean slightly, less predatory contract. BBC didn't like this, so they kicked her and tried to ruin her reputation. This misstep resulted in the company announcing a new album to cover up the mess, which fans promptly and surprisingly successfully boycotted. In the end, I think it had less than 200 pre-orders. Obviously, the album had to be cancelled, and all of the other members of the group filed to end their hideously predatory and financially manipulative contracts with the company. As of the time of writing, all of them have left the company. They have been joining several other companies, and many have re-debuted in their Luna subunits, continuing their legacy to the massive applause of their fans. This was an interesting one, purely because most of the time when fans want to boycott something, New Jeans, it doesn't work. New Jeans. But for Luna, it did, and was very successful. Some people continue the boycott to this day by not consuming any content still owned by BBC. The most recent scandals as of the time of writing this episode include the downfall of 50/50, the Made in Abyss scandal, and Seonghwa from Rise's accusations. 50/50 were a massively successful group from a very small company, whose song Cupid went mega viral. Even if you don't know a thing about K-pop, you've probably heard the song. The members later filed a lawsuit against their company for mistreatment, and the fans are very divided. On one hand, it seems that the members were manipulated into signing the lawsuit, thinking that they could get something out of it. On the other hand, many believe the CEO is a sympathetic figure, as he supposedly sold many of his assets to fund the group. On the other hand, the members cite real health issues they experienced because of their mistreatment, and many are sympathetic of them, although others are upset that they supposedly backstabbed their sympathetic CEO. In the end, the group seems to have gone on a massive downward spiral, and it doesn't help that the financials and copyright of the song have also led to some concerns. Next, we have Seonghwa from Rise, who, from the moment he was announced as a member, has been met with a barrage of accusations, including bad behaviour, dating, smoking, and other things. A few days ago, at time of writing the script, it was announced that he would go on an indefinite hiatus, which makes fans very concerned since the last time an SM artist went on hiatus was Lucas, who went radio silent for 2 years before finally being removed from the group, but not the company? Very weird. At time of recording this audio, Seonghwa has been on hiatus for several months. We haven't had any information, and Rise have had comebacks without him, so it's not looking good, let's just say that. Finally, we have the Made in Abyss drama. Made in Abyss is an anime which has some seriously concerning scenes, including minors being abused while naked and a whole bunch of other disturbing stuff. 4 idols, Mingi of ATEEZ, Taeyoung of NCT, Woozi of 17, and Soobin of TXT, were accused of liking and recommending the anime to their fans. Hence, some people accused them of pedophilia and just generally being gross people. However, it seems that the anime has been censored in Korea, and that there were mistranslations and other issues that were ignored in this controversy. Taeyoung owned a heavily censored version of the manga. Woozi said he couldn't finish watching it. Soobin expressed an interest in the world building and message as opposed to the provocative scenes, and Mingi said he couldn't recommend it, or something along those lines. The point is, people are upset, but as there almost always is in K-pop, context can change a lot. So that was a brief, or kind of brief, journey through the scandals of the K-pop industry, from the 1990s to today. I hope you learned something, if the least that K-pop fans are a bit trigger happy with scandals. But I tried to pick legitimate ones here, not just, OMG, V and Jennie are dating. But all of these were pretty serious scandals. Racism, bullying, sex trafficking, manipulation, blackmail, and more. But that isn't the goal of this video. This video is, as the title says, about funny K-pop scandals. So let's talk some actually funny and relatively harmless K-pop scandals. Let's have a look at some of the funniest scandals to grace the K-pop community, ranked in rough order from my least to most favourite. Keeping in mind that I find all of these very funny, just some more so than others. I haven't picked every funny scandal to pop up, and I haven't picked any scandals that I think are stupid as opposed to funny, such as every generic dating scandal. Since my list was a little bit old, if more come up, I may add an honourable mention section at the end. So let's start with one I find funny, but the least funny. And lucky for us, it's another Aussie, in fact, a fellow Sydney resident. This rumour surfaced from goodness knows where, perhaps Twitter or TikTok? In early 2023, January to be specific. The rumours argued that Bangchan, the leader of JYP group Stray Kids, had got a BBL, or Brazilian butt lift, a plastic surgery procedure involving taking fat from the person's body and implanting it into the butt to, well, make your butt look better, I guess? Make the butt larger and the stomach smaller, basically. This rumour was presented to Chan when he was live, and he proceeded to demonstrate that he had no clue what a BBL was by searching it on Urban Dictionary and still being confused. He eventually stopped looking for a definition after fans told him not to worry about it, but the chances that he still went and searched for it later are pretty decent, to say the least. STAYZ, Stray Kids' fandom, were understandably shocked by the rumours but found it quite funny. But why this rumour and why Chan? Well, STAYZ do like to joke that Chan has a massive ass. You know, the whole, "oh, that's America's ass" thing. But he's Australian, so Australia's ass. The typical K-pop memes. Thus, I guess someone made a joke about how the only possible way for him to have such a nice ass would be to have a BBL. And thus, since the world of K-pop and K-pop rumours moves so fast, it instantly spread to both the rest of the fandom and the idol himself. And that's about it. This one is at the bottom of my list because there's next to no substance to it, and the only thing you really get when you look it up is a handful of tweets and some articles that don't really give any context. It's a funny rumour, there just isn't enough to make it worth spending a lot of time on. Moving on. This one is similar in that there isn't a lot to it, and it originated as more of a joke than anything else. Also in that it reached the idols it was talking about. In K-pop over the past few years, there has been increasing pushes for animated groups. This arguably began with Eternity, a little-known 11-member AI girl group created in 2021. Following them were Superkind, who actually have quite an interesting concept. The group debuted in 2022 with 5 members, 4 real and 1 animated. The animated member was called Sejin and was promoted ridiculously more than the real members of the group. Understandable since he took so much effort to create and animate, but upsetting considering the other 4 members got next to nothing, having worked themselves to the bone as trainees only to be overshadowed by someone who isn't even real. Anyway, that's a different topic. It later emerged that Superkind would be a group that would grow over time and would eventually have 10 members, 5 human or PRID, and 5 animated members or, I don't know how to pronounce it, Nuke? I'll be saying Nuke for this video. Anyway, this meant that we later got 2 new members announced, a human, JDV, and an animated member, Seong. This means that in the future we should probably expect another 4 animated members to finish the 5-5 split. But putting aside Superkind's interesting structure, let's talk about how they promote themselves. Like many other groups, they run social media accounts where the members make shorts and interact with fans. But unlike other groups, Superkind's shorts are sometimes also made by their animated members, Sejin and Seong. At one point, Seong reacted to the debut, music video and stage of another group, MAVE, who had recently debuted with their song Pandora. MAVE are an entirely animated group made up of 4 members, and when Seong watched their music video and performances, he seemed very impressed, especially with member Xena. Superkind's account later released a video of Seong blushing and looking very flustered in response to a fan's suggestion that Xena might treat him to dinner. This led to a wave of dating rumours between the two and some very funny AI-related jokes, such as people asking if they had shared code or if they were caught in the same server. Nothing has been heard of the rumours since, and I don't believe that either Superkind or MAVE have made further comments. In fact, MAVE's socials didn't comment on the rumours at all. But at the end of the day, this was a funny and cute little rumour between two idols who aren't even real, and thus, thankfully, wasn't taken very seriously by fans. But honestly, I think they look great together. Now onto one that is hilarious in that it is so unrealistic. At least the last two kind of had evidence behind them, even if it was shaky. Apparently, and I wouldn't really know since I haven't been a Shaol for long, around the time SHINee debuted, there were rumours that three of the members, Key, Minho and Jonghyun, were in gangs or mobs of some kind. The evidence for this was, well, nothing. Putting aside all of the other potential evidence against this, I'd like to point out that these members were aged 16, 16 and 18, or younger at the time they would have been in the gang. And sure, there are young gang members out there, but this was just a very weird and unrealistic rumour. This one gets to be higher on my list because although it is relatively easy to imagine the members as gangsters now, with their cool and more mature images as 30-year-olds, the contrast between them now and imagining them as gangsters when they were 16 and 18 is just hilarious. Hence why it is in this video. In September of 2021, Soobin of TXT and Seonghwa of ATEEZ made a fatal mistake. They both posted similar pictures with similar captions for the start of the month and season. In K-pop, anyone who posts anything in a place or a similar manner at a similar time to someone else is instantly accused of dating them. And I say accused because, as I said earlier, dating in K-pop is a big no-no. Anyway, as you would expect, some people decided that Soobin and Seonghwa must be dating, creating one of, if not the, first dating scandal with any actual legitimacy, not just random fans writing a random fanfiction about two people, between two male idols from different groups. Obviously, the fans found this hilarious, especially because ATEEZ and TXT are very close to each other. It was made even more bizarre by the fact that two members of these groups, Wooyoung from ATEEZ and Yeonjun from TXT, are openly very close to each other and even call each other honey and baby on live streams, or make kissy faces at each other at concerts. Thus, the combined fandoms of the two groups thought it was one of the best jokes in the universe that Soobin and Seonghwa, generally considered straightforward and quiet members of the groups, got a dating scandal before Wooyoung and Yeonjun did. You know, the two members who literally act like they are dating. Anyway, since there was no other evidence that the two were dating and the evidence that was given was as flimsy as a sheet of tissue paper, these rumours were dropped almost instantly. The only remnant of them today is the people who say that Hongjoong should come and collect his husband, and thus, an image that I have since lost of him looking angry with Soobin was jokingly touted as a sign of jealousy. And, of course, the fact that people continue to make comments about it whenever it becomes relevant. See me in episode 3 of this podcast referencing how Bahie wouldn't try to have a dating scandal with Soobin of all people, since, well, his only scandal ever has been with Seonghwa. In 2015, pictures were captured of Mamamoo Solar and a random dude walking together. These kinds of pictures in K-pop often show idols trying but failing to have secret dates with their partners, and thus create basically instant dating scandals. But after a while of staring at this image, Mamamoo's fandom, desperate to know who their leader was going out with, realised who it was. It was Moonbyul, one of the other members of the group. Moonbyul is a rapper and thus is often portrayed in a more masculine light to the rest of the members. She also seems to enjoy dressing in less feminine ways off stage too, hence why she could be seen as a man here. It later turned out that the two had been filming for a video and that Moonbyul had literally been dressed up like a guy for it. Here's a picture of her dressed up. This one is further up on the list because I think it's hilarious that Although fans often talk about how gay for each other female idols are, they've never actually had a dating scandal with each other. It's also funny because of how Mamamoo have a more mature and down-to-earth image, and how boyish Moonbyul is often portrayed. It's the perfect representation of how a heteronormative society views a lesbian relationship. One fake boy and one girly girl. But that's a discussion for another day. Let's move on to the next one. This one makes me crack up every time. 17 are known for having permanent subunits which have also released their own songs. But other than the well-known subunits of performance, hip-hop and vocal, they have a temporary or separate subunit, called Buseoksoon or BSS, short for the three members Boo Seung-kwan, Lee Seok-min or DK, and Kwon Sin-young or Hoshi. They released a single, Just Do It, in 2017, which fans loved, and in 2022 they came back with their first mini-album called Second Wind, which was widely considered by their fans to be their actual debut as such. Thus, spurred on by a skit the members did where they pretended to be debuting with 17 as their role models, the fans started to call Buseoksoon a fourth-gen group and make all of the jokes that would come with this. Fans first noticed that Buseoksoon had been working really hard to act like the members of 17 who they said were their idols. They had worked on making complex choreography, they'd tried to be funny in the same ways and similar scenarios, and they were dancing so hard the stage was about to break. The fan response was mixed here. Some fans found it adorable that Buseoksoon were mimicking their idols, and some 17 fans were disappointed that they were only copying a popular group and didn't seem to be developing their own fan base and personality, instead leeching off their seniors. Then Buseoksoon started doing dance challenges with almost every idol in the industry, including all of the other members of 17. But they didn't, the fans noticed, do a challenge with Hoshi, DK and Seonghwa. So not only did the fans beg for the members of Buseoksoon to collect all of the members of 17 and not to leave out Hoshi, DK and Seonghwa, but they also noticed that these three fourth-gen idols, only a few weeks into their debut, hadn't bowed to many of the 17 members, who were 7 years their industry seniors. And if you know anything about the culture of respect in Korea and K-pop, you know that not showing respect is a big no-no. The worst videos are these ones where they bully Vernon and Mingyu. It almost looks like they strangled Mingyu. And on another note, they bullied Sunghoon of ENHYPEN, who was also their senior. Basically, they were horribly disrespectful to people who they should have shown respect to, and even discriminated within the group since they decided to bow respectfully to 17's maknae, Dino. Hence, the comments of Buseoksoon's TikToks were flooded with 17 fans who were absolutely disgusted that not only had Buseoksoon been copying 17 and had discriminated against the various members of the group, showing clear favoritism, but also that they had been disrespectful towards their sunbaes. The worst crime a rookie group could commit. And this was an absolute riot because, as I said before, Buseoksoon were in fact members of 17, and they, the fans, and the entire K-pop industry to a lesser extent, were all role-playing, pretending that they were unknown fourth-gen rookie idols. You can probably see why I like this one. It's a hilarious indication of an inside joke that is actually what 17 would do, and we know this because they did something very similar for their 5th anniversary in 2020, where they dressed up as each other, something that was hilarious to older fans but was very confusing to newer fans like me who at the time didn't know all of the members' faces yet, and who thus legitimately thought that Vernon was Woozi and DK was Jonghan for a bit. I'd like to put in a little editing note that Buseoksoon have actually been continuing this joke for quite a while. Not exactly the same joke, but similar, where for their Going 17 show they had the Wonwoo's Diary episode, and for one of their recent award show performances they took a character from that show, a very loved character portrayed by Dino, Picholin, and had him actually do a part in their song as a real person at an award show. So all of the carrots were laughing, and All of the idols who were also carrots in the audience were laughing. And the people who didn't know the inside joke were incredibly confused why Dino was acting like an old man, singing songs about motivation and stuff. But Boosoksoon and their 17 related scandals weren't the first copying scandals to grip the world of ridiculous K-pop scandals. No, that honour belongs to a group who isn't even real. In 2021, the K-drama Imitation aired about K-pop groups, and with it, some of the groups from the show made their actual debuts in the real world. The most well-known one was Sparkling, consisting of 4 members, Yoojin, Hyunho, Sejong and Minso. They debuted with the song Diamond, and both the group and the song were questionable to say the least. Their dancing wasn't great, their vocals and rap were mediocre, they lacked stage presence and were completely out of sync, and the song itself was just generally not well produced. But even worse than that, 3 of the members had clearly tried to copy 3 of the members of popular boy group ATEEZ, specifically San, Seonghwa and Yoonho. They had tried to copy their looks and physicality, and they had tried to copy their dance skills, but of course had failed massively. The lack of shame that the members showed about such blatant copying was astounding to members of SHINee, ATEEZ's fandom, who flooded the comments of Sparkling's video pointing out these issues. In turn, Sparkling's fandom talked about how cute it was that the group clearly looked up to ATEEZ so much. But as you may have guessed from our previous Boosoksoon scandal, this was all a farce, a roleplay, because those 3 members of Sparkling were in fact none other than Seonghwa, San and Yoonho themselves. The 3 of them, along with ATEEZ's maknae Zhanghao, were acting in the series, along with members of other idol groups like SF9. And it just so happened that SHINee, and at times ATEEZ themselves, thought it would be fun to pretend that Sparkling were an actual group that actually tried to copy ATEEZ. The scandal, if you could even call it that, didn't progress far, and didn't even capture all of the fandom. In the comments of Sparkling's videos, there are both people who are pretending that they are a real group, and people who aren't, and instead talk about things like how hard San had to work to tone down his dancing to suit the concept. It was a tiny bit of fun in the midst of a dark period for SHINee, as I may or may not discuss in a future video. So now we get to move into the top 3. Can we get a drum roll, please? Also in 2021, K-pop was rocked by a bizarre scandal, one which it had never seen before. We have seen misogyny scandals, homophobia scandals, racism scandals, and so on, but we have never seen what we would see on that day. K-pop's very first misandry scandal. 17 went on Music Bank and had an interview with the MCs about their latest comeback with Anyone. And during the interview, member Mingyu made this gesture, which is considered by incel groups in Korea to be an attack. Supposedly the gesture is supposed to make fun of their supposedly small dicks, and thus they were incredibly offended. Interestingly, Mingyu has been involved in misogyny scandals before, which makes me think that perhaps he just hates everyone, men and women alike. But the fact of the matter is that, other than the small portion of incels who were offended, many people in the industry found this hilarious. 17 have been seen supporting women in LGBT+ causes before, so to think that they were misandrists as well was just the next logical step, and a very funny one at that in such a misogynistic country and industry. Carrots 17's fandom are generally known as being non-toxic, except in some very special cases, and of finding 17's scandals hilarious, as we have seen earlier in this video and will continue to see later. I also get the impression from circles I've been in, and from videos online, that a very sizable chunk of carrots are queer and especially lesbian women. They're one of the groups that just attracts that particular demographic, and it's probably because they tend to market themselves as your friends through going 17, rather than your idols or love interests. Obviously, they do still market themselves as love interests to a lot of people, but the presence of things like Going 17 helps them be seen as more of like friendship idols as opposed to romantic interest idols for lots of people. Now, there is legitimate debate as to whether or not 17 are actually misandrists. There's the argument that since they are South Korean men, they probably know the colloquial meaning of the gesture and thus wouldn't have done it by accident. On the other hand, there's the fact that it made sense in context with what they were talking about, and this gesture can just mean a small gap or a small thing in general. It doesn't have to be misandrist. I personally like to think that 17 do hate men, especially people like Scoups, who has said his iconic line of "flowers did nothing wrong, only men did." I think there's more evidence for 17 hating men than for them hating women. But there isn't much evidence in either direction, probably because as idols they have an image to maintain and they need to appeal to as many people as possible. Chances are that 17 don't hate men, but I think it's hilarious that this is now a somewhat widespread belief, especially among carrots. But moving on to the top two, I found it ridiculously hard to pick which of these two scandals was my favourite. I did eventually pick, and I will admit that my bias did have a lot to say in it in the end. But number 2 is also a good segue, since it is also about someone discriminating against others in the opposite way of what we would expect. That's right, it's... The 2023 survival show Boys Planet was very interesting in more than one way, and thus I will 100% be making some videos about it in the future. But if there was one thing that was so out of this world, it was the nature of the eventual first place of the show. Zero Base One's centre, Zhanghao. Not only was Zhanghao older than most people who debut through Produce, being 22 and having already finished a degree in teaching, but he was also a massive K-pop fan, a musical prodigy, and Chinese, aka a demon according to Mnet's editing staff, and, like his Korean counterpart Hanbin, seemed to be the perfect person. I'll talk about it more when I talk about the group and the show, but Hanbin and Zhanghao seem to be the literal perfect people, and seem to know how to say and do the perfect things at the perfect times. It's kind of uncanny. That said, it's probably because they're older and thus more mature and have more experience. Kind of crazy that 22 is older in K-pop. Anyway, putting that aside for a later day, let's talk about one thing that got Zhanghao a lot of attention and a lot of votes. Especially, probably, from carrots. It was revealed through the internet grapevine that before his time on Boys Planet, Zhanghao had apparently posted on Weibo, spoofing about how heterosexual people should be appreciated and made equal in society, not discriminated against. Here is the supposed translation of what he said. Do you know heterosexuality? I don't discriminate against heterosexuals. The world needs to be more tolerant of them. But there must be a lot of pressure on heterosexuals. They're very brave. Let's just respect their sexual orientation. And I can't accept love between a man and a woman in my whole life. It's disgusting. Why in the world does love exist between men and women? If you have love and you're not the same sex, your taste can't be normal. I can't understand. This, combined with supposed photos of him and a boyfriend, and his behaviour on the show, especially allegedly kissing Hanbin on the neck in the finale, led to the general assumption by his fans that Zhanghao was well and truly heterophobic. And everyone loved it. Many people said that they couldn't care less about Boys Planet but wanted to vote for him anyway, purely because of this. I thought this was hilarious, especially with how Boys Planet went, and with Zhanghao and Hanbin being ranked 1 and 2 in the show. I also love the association Zero Base One have to the LGBT+ community in general, and how this makes them a unique group in the industry, which we will, again, discuss in a future video. So yes, I do continue to refer to Zhanghao as heterophobic Hao in my head, and I think often about how hilarious it is that one of the most popular survival show groups ended up with a foreign, more mature, heterophobic centre. Is there actual evidence for Hal being heterophobic? Well, it's debatable. Some people say that the evidence was fake or that it was mistranslated, and there isn't a lot of evidence anyway, but it is a pet theory for a lot of his fans. And as you can see from both Zero Base One's posts and comments under it, the Halbin Nation has risen and grown. And with that, on the topic of fans finding their idols' possible scandals super funny, let's move on to my favourite funny K-pop scandal of all time. Drumroll please. It is... Well, it was an Scoups topic, so I had to discuss it, and it really had to be my favourite. Sorry, Zhanghao, I love you, but Scoups will always be number one. In May 2023, Blackpink's Jennie and BTS's V were rumoured to be dating, and pictures of them walking together were captured in Paris. The internet went wild. Any dating rumours involving members of BTS especially blow up the internet and cause massive fan wars of people who either think that they shouldn't be dating or that they should be allowed to. Anyway, in the course of trying to remove V from these rumours, some armies tried to displace the rumours onto another idol, and they decided the most reasonable target would be 17's leader Scoups, since the man in the picture was wearing a jacket that looked like a jacket that Scoups had recently worn. And in true Carrot fashion, Carrots fought back, responding with a bombardment of proof that it wasn't Scoups, and expressing how offended they were that it would even be suggested that these pictures were of him. What was this proof? It wasn't that he was out of the country or that he wasn't the right height or anything. No. There was definitive proof that the man in the picture wasn't Scoups, because the man in the picture had a flat ass. And as pictures of Scoups' butt flooded the internet, the world was able to see that he would never be able to make his butt look so flat. Carrots weren't at all offended that he had been implicated in a dating scandal. They instead expressed their extreme dissatisfaction that people would dare to allege that Scoups' butt wasn't voluminous and wondrous. I think this is some next level trolling, but I don't really know who is being trolled. Army, the internet, or even Scoups himself, as you will see from this clip where the cameraman was praised for single-handedly saving Scoups from dating allegations. And so I have the mental image of Scoups going on his way, followed by a crowd of Carrots holding up signs of his massive butt and side-eyeing armies as they praise the cameraman and Scoups in general. Well and truly the best scandal in K-pop history, and one that hilariously backfired on those who tried to create it. And with that done and Scoups crowned as the king of K-pop scandals, let's discuss why these happened and what they mean. I'm really interested in how and why these scandals form, but especially why they are all about boy groups. On this list, only 1.5 out of 10 scandals were about girl groups. And that was about a fake girl group and Mamamoo, often touted by their fans as a woman group, not a girl group, and who generally have a more mature concept. So why is this the case? Well, I think that a lot of these funny scandals, and K-pop scandals in general, happen because K-pop fans have such an intense parasocial relationship with their idols, and because many of them are young and chronically online. Thus, they are quick to believe things, haven't yet been taught or practiced their critical thinking skills, and generally have an obsession with both idols and themselves being, quote, crackheads, hence all the crackhead compilations on YouTube. A lot of K-pop fans are looking for fun, and if they see something they like, especially inside jokes like Busoksoon and sparkling, they'll jump onto the bandwagon and start spreading ideas. There's also less likely to be actual fan wars and discourse in these funny scandals, since the people perpetuating them are usually the fans of the group themselves and have similar opinions. As to the legacy of these scandals, there isn't that much. Because most of them aren't very serious, and because most are perpetuated entirely within one fandom and are small little jokes, they die out quickly, and, as you can see from how long I talked about each one, don't have a lot of substance and background to them. They're pretty much one-dimensional and one-note. However, they do tend to have somewhat of an enduring legacy as they become inside jokes in a fandom. To this day, people refer to the Soobin and Seonghwa dating rumours and Zhanghao's heterophobia, even though those scandals are distant in the scheme of K-pop. As to why these scandals involve mostly boy groups, well, it's pretty obvious. It's something that 17 would hate: misogyny. Small rumours relating to girl groups like dating scandals, copying, or disrespecting people are often blown way out of proportion by fans and antis alike. For instance, ENHYPEN's Sunwoo once made this face on a live stream in response to his group mates, and the fans found it hilarious and it became a meme. But when Bahie from Kepler made a similar face while Hikaru rested her head on hers in a Kepler live, Bahie was labelled as hating Hikaru. When boy group members sit quietly in a live, they are tired or being left out by the company. But when girl group members do the same, the members of the group are leaving her out and they hate each other. When male idols get in dating scandals, there is usually a divide of people saying they should be allowed to date and they should not. But when a female idol does, it's skewed very far in the direction of her not being able to date and being slut-shamed for doing so, or being told she's letting down her fans as a lesbian icon. And God forbid a female idol would be accused of feminism or misandry, because you know they would be thrown out of the group and disowned by their own fans and the industry. Another example is the bullying accusations of 2020 to 2022, where a large number of idols were accused of bullying peers either in school or after school. These idols were typically popular members of popular groups, and the accusations against them varied from completely and obviously false to probably true. But these accusations affected idols in completely different ways. By and large, if a male and female idol were both accused with the same amount of evidence against them, the male idol would go on a short hiatus or even just continue promoting, while the female one would be banished to the basement for ages or even kicked out of their group. Some examples of male idols who were generally accepted to have some evidence against them, but who were barely affected, were Hyunjin of Stray Kids and Mingyu of 17, and some female idols who had no evidence against them include Soojin, ex-Idol member, and Garam, ex-LE SSERAFIM member. Garam was literally proven innocent and still left the group. This is just one of the many examples of how the industry treats male and female idols differently and how heavily misogynistic it is. Male idols can usually shrug off a scandal, but female idols struggle until the ends of the world. See Wonyoung, Jennie, Bahie, Yilin, and so on. And with that, let's bring back a guest from a previous episode. It's my friend Mia, back to talk about media and K-pop. So you may remember that in episode 4 I brought in a friend of mine who studies PR and advertising to talk about K-pop generations. Well, she decided that she was interested in this episode's topic too, so she's back again, this time to talk about K-pop scandals. So, welcome back. Can you please give a quick introduction of yourself for people who weren't here last time?
Sure. Hello everyone. My name is Mia, and I'm colleagues, and we both bonded over our love of K-pop. So very kindly, she's allowed me to talk on this podcast and share my opinions and thoughts. And yeah, nice to be able to talk again. And yeah, can't wait for today's episode.
Nice, thank you. So speaking of today's episode, We're talking about K-pop scandals today, as you know, funny K-pop scandals specifically. What made you want to be involved in this episode?
Uh, for me personally, just the amount of just crazy scandals I see in K-pop in general. Like there's every day it feels like there's always a new one, and quite a lot of them are serious.
Hmm.
And then you get these other ones that we're talking about today. These really light-hearted, really silly, just absolutely funny ones that some imaginative people have managed to come up with
Yeah.
that just honestly just give me a laugh. And like they're not serious, but
Mm.
it's just still crazy that they're being published and considered legitimate news.
Yeah. It's definitely an interesting thing. Now, I sent you the list of scandals I'm talking about in advance. Were there any of these scandals that you hadn't heard of before?
Well, it was very interesting. As a very passionate SHINee fan, I was not aware about their pre-debut gangster scandals. So I had to do a bit of research on that, and I was thoroughly surprised when I read it. Definitely hilarious. I had a good laugh about it,
Yeah.
but I was very surprised that I know they've had some scandals, but I didn't realize this was one of them. So
Yeah.
yes, I was very surprised about that one. And I mentioned with some, like I didn't know about some of these ones, and explained it to me prior earlier, and I did some research on them. So, like I wasn't a huge Boys Planet, like I didn't watch Boys Planet a lot, but some of the ones he told me about,
Mm.
some of the members of Boys Planet was when you explained it to me was quite funny.
Mm.
Um, and yeah, just a lot of these just like they they're just ridiculous,
Yeah.
but honestly, like they're so funny.
Yeah. I mean, obviously, I'm not as diehard of a SHINee fan as you are, but I didn't know about this scandal either. I think it's a relatively unknown one because I think it's so long ago that a lot of people have forgotten about it. But
Yes,
I agree. When I heard of it, I thought I definitely need to include it.
I mean it's pretty much the oldest one in your list because the rest of them are mostly third, fourth gen.
Yes, yeah, it
Um,
is. Yeah. I think a lot of the scandals from first and second gen were a lot more serious. And
yes,
any of the funny ones have probably faded. I think the oldest like funny ones that I've heard of, a lot of them are dating scandals. So things like
yeah,
when IU posted that photo of that other dude who was shirtless in her bed, and then they deleted it and were like, "Oh, they're just friends, guys." But he was shirtless in her bed, so no one believed that. Um,
yeah.
Stuff like that. But I didn't want to include many dating scandals because I think they're not that interesting.
And to be honest, fair enough. And dating scandals are like half of all the scandals you read anyway.
Yeah, exactly. I looked at some of these are very bizarre dating scandals. Not the usual ones you'd expect like Jenny and V or whoever else. Out of this list, or if you particularly want to include something not in this list, you can. What is your favorite funny K-pop scandal?
From your list especially, my favorite one is the Superkind and MAVE cheating scandal.
Oh yeah.
It's a recent one, but I
Yeah.
just love the fact that you have two groups that have AI. Or not, I don't know if you can, are they AI
They're
really?
not
I
AI, they're
mean,
just animated.
yeah, they're
Yeah.
animated idols and they're in a
Yeah.
dating scandal. I just think that's just hilarious.
I
Like,
agree, yeah.
how?
Mm. I also think it's great. The only reason it was so far down on my list was because everything else was so hilarious to me. Um,
Oh yeah.
but when I first heard about that, I was like, oh my goodness.
It's like has the world seriously come to where people think that two animated characters are dating?
I liked there were a lot of funny comments about it. Like I saw one that said, "Oh, what were they caught on the same server or something? Were they sharing code?" Like,
Yes,
yeah.
yes, I saw those ones. Honestly, people with the jokes, like, it's fantastic.
Yeah, and luckily I don't think anyone took it too seriously, which is what made it good. And that's what made
Yeah,
most of these scandals good is that no one's really taken them too seriously.
yeah. And you know what? Like, I like like they're the funny ones that we read about. I like the ones, lighthearted. There's
Mm,
obviously like a joke and everyone can just laugh it off. Like
mm,
this, especially this one, this dating one, like no one's taking it seriously, right? No
yeah,
one's like hating on these groups. It's just like a funny thing.
yeah, yeah, yeah. Nice. What is a funny scandal that you'd potentially like to see in the industry, or one that you'd maybe make yourself if you had, as you've said earlier, the imagination to come up with one of these?
Oh, that's hard. Because I feel like everything's been done already.
That's true, that's true.
I don't know. I don't like dating scandals are funny, but when they
Mm,
involve like obviously the animated one's funny because they're not
mm,
like I guess they're not like I mean not necessarily real people. Like you
mm,
don't know the person the behind the person who animates.
mm,
Whereas like dating scandals with real life like real people is obviously quite it's like not very nice, especially because the
mm,
industry is very
mm,
very uptight about idols dating, and it's like very draining on the mentality of reading
mm.
scandal after scandal of dating scandals. Um,
Should I discuss some of mine, maybe?
yeah,
I
discuss
didn't,
some of yours.
yeah, I didn't really write anything, but I've been thinking while you've been thinking as well. I think it would be funny if someone had a scandal about like some weird decision they've made. Like if someone had a scandal about liking mint chocolate versus not liking mint chocolate, because I know that's big in K-pop, or like playing Dota instead of League of Legends, because a lot of idols play League of Legends, and Dota's like the rival to that. So that would be interesting.
Oh,
You could also have what was it? You know how a few years ago that like how many holes does a straw have? How many butts does a person have? That debate
oh yes,
went around a
yes.
lot. I think it would be funny if someone had like a legitimate scandal about their answer to that question. Like, I know, hopefully everyone on this channel knows that Soobin's my bias in TXT, right? But he said
Mm-hmm.
that humans have two butts. And
Oh,
in
okay.
my opinion, that is inexcusable and shows a clear lack of biological knowledge. So,
Yeah,
so like something like that. If I could give Subin a scandal for saying that humans have two butts, would I do it? Maybe.
it'd be like going back to your chocolate ice cream. It's like
Mm,
someone stated on like a stream that they hated chocolate ice cream,
mm.
and then there's a picture of them caught by like dispatch, and they're
Oh
eating like
yeah,
chocolate ice cream. I think that would
that
be
would be
absolutely hilarious.
great. Yeah. Or like I don't know, someone like, Hoshi from 17, he's got all the tiger plushies and he's like really big on I'm a tiger. If
Hmm.
footage was caught of him like throwing one of his plushies out or something,
Oh
that would
yeah.
be insane. Or for instance, 17 have two fandoms where one is for Going 17 and one is their general fans. If in
Hmm.
Going 17 they stopped thanking carrots and they just thanked cubics, because cubics are the
Oh,
ones who watch Going 17. Like something
that's
like
funny.
that would be, in my opinion, funny. 17 have had a lot of funny scandals. I think it's because their fans just don't take life too seriously for the most part.
Mm. Like I was searching up like the least toxic fandoms,
Yeah.
like K-pop fandoms, and they're definitely the carrots and the cubics are definitely one of them. Those groups.
Yeah, I think they've had like one or two things where it's a little bit but for the most part I think they're generally considered pretty chill.
Mm.
Oh, there's also so in our uni's K-pop club,
Hmm.
um there is a very unusually high number of S-Coups biased carrots. Um,
Ah,
like seriously unusual. Like seven of us or something were having bingsu together, and we were all S-Coups biased by complete coincidence. And it might be in a very absurd world, perhaps funny if we all battled it out for his affections or something like that.
you know how SHINee's Ring Ding Dong,
Mm,
like how that's like a banned song for
mm,
studying.
mm,
Imagine if that song had like a resurgence during. I
mm.
mean, I know it has a general resurgence during exam time. Oh no, it doesn't because it's a banned song.
Yeah, it's
But if it
banned.
had a general resurgence, I think it'd be really funny.
That's pretty cool. Yeah.
Or someone releases another bop like that.
Yeah, I want another song like that. Like not songs that are seriously designed to go viral. Like things like, Jisoo's Flower, even Cupid. Those were kind of designed to go viral. But
Mm.
like I don't think they designed Ring Ding Dong to go viral. I think
No,
it's just such an unserious song, and I think that works in its favor.
oh, yeah, for sure.
Yeah?
I remember this quote they were saying like it was the first it was like the first album where we became men and then we sang a children's song.
Yeah.
I love that
That's
cracked me
good, but
up.
that sounds like something SHINee would say. It sounds like something SHINee would do as well. So now that we've talked about a few possibilities, do you have any funny scandals you'd really like to see, or you think it's just what we've
Um,
discussed?
yeah, what we discussed. Maybe there's one, and only because we're talking about SHINee.
Uh,
Remember when they did the interview on I forgot, it's one of those shows. It was like Inkigayo or like Music Bank. It was with
mm.
what's her name from La Seraphim?
Unche?
Is it Unche? Unche, yeah.
Yeah.
And she congratulated Key for being a man. He's
Oh
like
yeah.
32-year-old being
Yeah,
a
yeah,
man.
yeah.
I think it'd be really funny if there was like a scandal going out. It's like is a shiny still children or something
Ah,
crazy like that. Because their whole concept, like from the beginning, was about being like young boy.
yeah. I mean,
And now they're all in their 30s now.
I think their profile on Spotify is still like, oh, this contemporary youthful group. And it's not like they're old, but for K-pop, they're kind of old.
Yeah, exactly. It's like some scandal being like, oh, like Shiny are now like going to be men. They're going to be releasing different songs or
Yeah.
something like that. Or like, you know, or
Mm,
maybe like
mm.
have Shiny grown up, or like some scandal that they're all still teenagers or something stupid like that.
Yeah, like they changed their name to, I don't know, what's the opposite of shiny? Burnished or something?
Yeah, or like they're like vampires and they're or I don't
Yeah,
know.
that's true. That's
They
true.
SM are growing several of them to keep them young, keep the concept young.
I
I
I
don't know.
think I've heard things about people cloning idols. Like there was a rumor that BTS wouldn't have actually renewed their contracts, so they actually didn't renew, and Hype just replaced them with clones or something like that.
Yeah,
But those are like the brand of like disturbing K-pop rumors as opposed to actual K-pop scandals.
mm,
No, I agree with that, and I think SHINee has a lot of potential for funny scandals as well. Knowing them.
yeah. And I think the funny thing is that when I look at scandals, like people, the older groups, the veteran groups, they kind of not necessarily get away with more, but like the quote unquote scandals they get into, more people laugh them off. Where if it's like a brand new like group, they're more
Mm,
like they people take them more seriously.
mm. I mean, they've already solidified their image, I guess. They've proved themselves. Whereas a group like 50/50, for instance, they were in quite, like, obviously they were very new. They were, what, like 6 months old? Um,
Mhm.
and they're still, like, solidifying their image and everything. So if something goes wrong, people are going to notice.
Yeah,
Yeah.
for sure.
But like even though groups like SHINee and Super Junior have had several controversies, they've shown that they're going to continue going anyway. So what's the point of like trying to
Yeah,
cancel them? It's not going to work.
fair enough. Yeah, that's true for sure.
Cool. So, we've kind of been talking about this already, but is there anything else you'd like to say on the topic of funny K-pop scandals?
Not really, other than the fact it's a very niche thing. Like you don't
Mm.
really find many other industries having funny scandals.
I
Because scandals
agree.
aren't
Yeah.
usually seen in a positive light or like in
Mm,
funny. I
mm.
think K-pop's that unique, like niche where it can happen and it's hilarious. But
Yeah.
yeah, other than that, not really. Yeah.
Yeah, I think it's possibly got to that point where so many K-pop scandals come out, and for me there's different K-pop scandals. There's like serious ones like Burning Sun or stuff like that.
Mhm.
There's stuff that isn't really a scandal, like people dying and stuff like that. Like it's not a scandal, but sometimes people call it that because it still shakes the industry. Then there's stupid scandals like people getting upset that people are dating, or when people said that that guy from EXO should leave the group because he got married, stuff like
Oh,
that.
and
I would call that a stupid scandal because it's not funny. It is serious, but it's not, in my opinion, worth a scandal. Like Burning Sun is obviously worth a scandal because actual real harm happened to people. But Chen's just
Mhm.
chilling with his wife. And then there's funny K-pop scandals, which are like no one really took it that seriously. It's not serious. It's not, it's not that bad, all of that. So I think K-pop has had enough stupid scandals that people are able to appreciate the funny ones more.
Yeah.
Thank you for being on this episode again. At this point, I don't believe we've planned when you'll come back, but thank you anyway, and I have no doubt we'll see you again. So
Thank you.
we'll see you when we see you.
No worries.
Great. Thank you for coming on, and
Thank you so much for
yeah.
inviting me.
Scandals are a huge part of the K-pop industry. The nature of the industry, including how polished it is, how privacy invading it is, and the huge number of deeply parasocial relationships, promotes the development of scandals and the way in which they blow up. There are several varieties of scandals in the industry, from literally deadly serious ones to just bad ones, to ones that are so unremarkable that some people are shocked that they even become scandals to begin with. Then there are the scandals we discussed today, the funny ones that aren't even actual scandals, but more of short-lived K-pop memes that become fandom inside jokes. I ranked my top 10 funny K-pop scandals, but if you know any more, please do let me know in the comments. I love to hear about them. The moral of the story is that 17 are the kings of silly comedy K-pop scandals, and that heterophobic Hao is the king of the 5th gen, which we actually decided wasn't 5th gen a few episodes ago. Funny K-pop scandals are a great way for fandoms to express themselves in a relatively harmless way, and they can create a lot of unity and enjoyment among fans. Unfortunately though, they also make us consider the nature of scandals in general, and as I discussed in this video, how they disproportionately and harshly affect female idols as opposed to male idols. This just brings attention to how misogynistic our society is in general, and especially the progress that needs to be made in South Korea and the K-pop industry. But nonetheless, there will continue to be memes and there will continue to be funny and stupid K-pop controversies. Probably by our track records coming from SHINee or 17. The TLDW is Scoups is my bias. It is true. And with that, that's it for today's episode. I hope you learned something and I'll see you next time.